What's the good word, y'all? DKB here. We're covering the New York Jets trade deadline recap, as well as some of the NFL teams overall. And then, of course, how that's going to impact the New York Jets and how we look to finish our second half of the season here. And so when we take a look at things, basically the Bears, the Bills, the Jaguars, the Vikings, Lions, and the Dolphins are concerns here because the New England Patriots did not happen to make any critical moves before the trade deadline passed. And so if we want to start off with the Bills, who will actually be seeing this Sunday, they actually made a couple more moves to try to shore up their teams. We want to take a look at rankings. This was always going to be one of those huge circled games on the calendar. Not only are we going to have to see them twice a year, but they've essentially been the cream of the crop of the NFL and kind of the crown jewel, depending on how you feel about the Chiefs and the AFC. And once again, they're kind of dominating. So for those that love the DVOA rankings, offensively, they're currently the number 5 team. Defensively, they're the number 4. So we're talking about a top 5 team overall. And then when it comes to overall team, when you want to throw in special teams and all that kind of stuff too, it bumped them up to number 1 in the rankings as a whole. So a very formidable team. I've talked about it a little bit before. We've seen them hang almost 40 points on somebody in a single half. It can get crazy very quickly once Josh Allen and his offense can get going. And we've seen how the defense has been able to stifle a lot of people. So in terms of the trade deadline for them, they did acquire safety Dean Marlowe, and then the bigger name here is going to be running back Naheem Hines after they end up unloading Zach Moss in the swap there. So Dean Marlowe, again, much more of a depth piece. They want to continue to try to build something with Micah Hyde still being on injured reserve. Naheem Hines could be a huge move. I mean, we're talking about a guy here that looked like he could be one of those next great top 5, top 10 running backs in the NFL. We've seen him carrying the Colts offense while they've been having a lot of turmoil trying to figure out their quarterback situation. And so it just seems like a really, really smart move to get Naheem Hines in a new situation, ideally an offense where the Bills are really just a potent or even average rushing offense away from potentially running away with a lot of these offensive records. And then defensively, you really just want to make sure for their team and how things were built that things are being steady on the back end. And so continuing to have that safety depth for them is going to be important, especially considering what they brought to this team with the play. Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer has been absolutely stifling, and they haven't allowed many big plays whatsoever over the top of the defense. So that's a trend they look to continue there. And then, across the board, we're talking about week 9 of the NFL season at this point. Everybody has, at the very minimum, some bumps and bruises that are going on. So, critically, when we're talking about injured reserve for these teams, the Bills, they're looking at safety, wide receiver, tackle, and guard. It's kind of being those primary spots. They opted to try to work out the safety depth. And of course, as I mentioned, the running game would be a significant advantage to their team as a whole and potentially makes them very unstoppable. And then when we want to look at the Bears as one of our very next matchups, this is a team that looks like it should ideally be an easy win on our calendar, but we've seen what happens if a team wants to overlook them, the way they demolished the Patriots. But it's a very interesting situation. Justin Fields, Zach Wilson coming out of the same class. Nobody from that class really looks like they're running away and is going to become an absolute superstar in the NFL so far, Trevor Lawrence included, although you could probably say he's definitely the best coming out of that class so far, arguably. But either way, they did make some pretty huge moves for a team that, according to the rankings, offensively, they're number 29. And then defensively, they're number 26. And keep in mind, I'm going based off the DVOA rankings provided by Football Outsiders. They trade away Roquan Smith, the linebacker. They trade away the defensive end, Robert Quinn. They did pick up Chase Claypool from the Steelers, and then they did bring in, as part of one of those trades, and I want to say it was with Roquan Smith, AJ Klein. Now, injury-wise for them, guard, wide receiver, linebackers, center, they've been hit pretty hard, but nothing has clicked for that team really outside of that Patriots game. It's been very so Zach Wilson-esque numbers coming from Justin Fields, but there's a very different situation over there with the Bears, where the only offensive weapon they really had was Mooney, and then there's a lot of pieces that never got built out around them while they used to draft in free agency to try to beef up this defense quite a bit, and it just didn't work out. Roquan Smith then requested a trade. Robert Quinn is up there in age, and so it just made sense for them to unload some of these players to try to recoup some capital for this next draft in the 2024 draft, which they did. But then they do make the big move, flipping a second to acquire Chase Claypool and potentially bring in that additional weapon for Justin Fields, and a very explosive option. Chase Claypool in his rookie season looked like he could have been an absolute phenom, and things have, they've tampered a little bit more, but you still see all of the elements of what made him a second round draft pick. And so between the big target radius, Justin Fields being on the move, Chase Claypool operating in a very the offense would lend itself to more athletic players, as would any other NFL offense. But having a guy like Justin Fields back there, it places a little bit more of a premium on a guy like Chase Claypool. So we don't know if we'll see him for our matchup. Ideally, most likely he will. I want to say we see the Bills, we see the Bears right after, I believe, the second Bills matchup, I think, anyways. But by the time we see them, they'll at least have a couple weeks to kind of get them adjusted to the offense, get them familiar with the playbook, and we'll kind of see what happens in the intermediate. So that'll be something to keep your eye on. It'll also be worth looking at, seeing if the offense bumps themselves up in any fashion. It's hard for me not to think that the defense isn't going to fall flat on their faces moving forward for the rest of the season. So hopefully this is still a dub on our end when we take a look at the calendar. But as the saying goes, any given Sunday. And then when we take a look at the Jaguars, injuries as well: cornerback, offensive tackle, linebacker, wide receiver, defensive end. They've been able to go out there and elevate themselves, though, in Doug Peterson's first helm as head coach with Trevor Lawrence. And they're looking at number 16 offensively, the 19th best team defensively. And they make a huge move that's not going to impact them this season. We're really going to have to see what happens with Calvin Ridley and his indefinite, I believe it's an indefinite suspension. But it could be a huge move for Trevor Lawrence heading into what's going to be his third year, assuming Calvin Ridley doesn't play at any point given this year. And it's an eye to the future, but they got him for a steal. I don't remember specifically what it was here, but I think it was a fourth rounder in 2023 with a conditional fourth rounder in 2024. So, pennies on the dollar for them. And then, of course, we had the trade with the Jaguars as well that brought James Robinson over to us, which we're hoping is going to be a steal. But it'll be great to see Zach Wilson versus Trevor Lawrence. I mean, we were able to steal one, I would say, last year with that matchup. But there's definitely a stark difference in talent that we're seeing, in consistency between Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson. But we'll have a bye week to kind of figure some things out, get Elijah Moore reacclimated to this offense. Corey Davis will come back at some point, so Denzel Mims most likely will probably end up being inactive again here shortly. But we shall see. There's a lot of moving pieces in this offense that we need to fix. With that said, though, let's keep it pushing. So with the Vikings, this is a team that we're going to absolutely struggle against. The best team left out of the Bills matchup is going to be this Vikings team, number 12 offensively, number 4 defensively, and we're seeing Justin Jefferson try to reset every record book that he can possibly get his hands on that he would be involved in. And so when it comes to the Vikings, they make a huge power play that should open up all of the things for the offense they would have expected if Irv Smith was able to stay healthy and continue to contribute in his offense. However, like everybody else, they got hit at wide receiver, tight end, they got hit hard, running back, safety, defensive end, bringing in TJ Hawkinson, not only from their rival, the Lions, but then to to plug in a guy that was able to go out there and put up 103 touchdowns at one point in a game. TJ Hawkinson looked like he could be that next wave of great tight ends in the league for us, and he should get way more opportunities, seeing as he won't be the focal point with Justin Jefferson out there, to go out there and absolutely balance out that offense when it comes to the passing game and add another very viable weapon to them. So this should be scary, especially for us, considering we've never really blocked tight ends particularly well. Uh, the best that I'm thinking we can hope for at this point is that Kirk Cousins ends up kind of going back into his ways that we've seen historically, where he falls into that game manager role, never really steps up to the plate if we can get an early lead. But it is looking like a very, very tough matchup for us. Defensively, they stack up strongly. And then offensively, again, Justin Jefferson can go off for 100 yards in any given half. He's an absolute beast in the red zone, and then you're throwing in that TJ Hawkinson piece. Not looking forward to that game. And then the Lions, of course, this is the inverse of it. They're number 11th offensively, actually. Remember, at one given point through like the first quarter of the season, they were the number one ranked offense in the league, but then they get decimated. Guard, wide receiver, cornerback, defensive end, safety, running back. DeAndre Swift was that huge piece for them, which ended up kind of going through some injuries. They end up trading away, as we just discussed, TJ Hawkinson. So now you're really kind of left head scratching with the Lions. Amon St. Raw still over there, but they need to figure some things out. It definitely looks like they have an eye towards the future now. Jared Goff probably not going to be in their long-term plans moving forward based off this trade move, and their offense is definitely going to take quite a few steps back. So hopefully it's something we can capitalize on. And then just for the Jets as a whole, the only move we made was trading Jacob Martin, and as we now know, we got the fourth rounder in 2024. Definitely continuing to add to the war chest. And then Jacob Martin goes to the Broncos to help replace Bradley Chubb, who is now with the Dolphins. Absolute stunner. Talking about the Dolphins, number 8 offensively, number 21 defensively. They add superstar Bradley Chubb. We heard the reports earlier that it was potentially a battle between the Jets and the Dolphins. We got reports from Rich Meany that said it was never a true interest for us, even though the reports mentioned that both teams potentially would have been willing to offer up a first rounder, and that's essentially what happens. The Dolphins are absolutely trying to capitalize on their trade window. I have to go back and take a look at what their war chest in the next draft or two is kind of looking like, because I want to say they had 2 first rounders still, if I'm remembering correctly. But either way, they pulled the move off. Bradley Chubb is going to a defense that could potentially start blowing some teams away. The pass rush is going to look ferocious. It's going to give the cornerbacks and safeties a lot more time to go out there and try to make some plays. And then they add a familiar name for that Mike McDaniels should be able to involve in his running back rotation in Jeff Wilson, which was also another name that was floated out there prior to us grabbing James Robinson. So this continues to be in the AFC East, kind of the 49ers influence, continuing the trend there. But, we heard all of the moans and groans from the fans about how we decimated them when we, met them in our first game. And the fact that there was injuries. There's no Tua. We knock out Teddy quickly. And then everything else just kind of falls off the rails for them. So we have what is setting up to look like some teams that should essentially be powerhouses when we're talking about playoffs truly being on the horizon. The Bills, the Vikings, the Dolphins for us. Things may definitely come down to that Week 17 matchup with us trying to secure our spot, and knowing that Bradley Chubb is going to be lining up on the defense for them, and Jeff Wilson probably playing an integral role by then for them. It's definitely some scary thoughts, but that is the recap. That is some of the generic highlights and need to know things about what's going to happen with our schedule, how those could potentially be influenced. We'll dive deeper into them as we kind of do our recaps. Jets Flight Squad podcast on Thursdays, things like that. But let me know what your guys' thoughts are. Craziest NFL trade deadline I can remember in recent memory. But whether it's, division rivals for us, or just some of these other NFL teams, the Vikings, the Jaguars that we're going to play, Let me know what you guys thought about some of the moves they made, and if it's going to be easier and a little bit more difficult for us to try to sustain some success. And I will catch you guys again. Peace.